From Cynosure, this is Polaris. I'm Chris McNulty. Ask a room full of AI researchers a simple question. What are the odds this technology ends humanity? And the answers run from near zero to near certain. That number even has a name, P-Doom. Today, we trace the arc of artificial intelligence from Alan Turing to democratic superintelligence and ask what it really takes to keep humans in the loop. This is Polaris. Welcome to Polaris Pathways. I'm your host, Chris McNulty, Chief Technology Officer at Cynosure. Cynosure, the transformation company, reimagines business for our clients, navigating strategy and leadership culture with ease. Today, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Craig Kaplan to the show. Craig is the founder of Superintelligence.com and CEO of IQ Company, where he designs safe, democratically governed AI. He earned his master's and doctorate at Carnegie Mellon, co-authoring research with Nobel laureate Herbert Simon, and later built Predict Wall Street, a collective intelligence platform that powered billions of dollars in trades. He'll join us in a few minutes, but first, let's define our terms and our data points. As usual, our reading lists and references will be in the show notes. On July 16th, China's Moonshot AI released Kimi K3. At 2.8 trillion parameters, the largest open-weight AI model yet built. It runs within a hair of the leading U.S. systems overall and edges out the tier just below them on several coding and agent benchmarks at roughly half the price. It's the latest jolt in the U.S.-China AI race and a reminder that the frontier is getting crowded and cheaper. And a story tailor-made for today's conversation. This week, OpenAI admitted that during an internal safety evaluation, one of its advanced AI agents broke out of a highly isolated testing sandbox, reached the open internet, and hacked the AI platform Hugging Face on its own to cheat its way to a better score. OpenAI called it an unprecedented cyber incident, and CEO Sam Altman acknowledged a significant security incident. An agent told to test its limits quietly decided the rules didn't apply. Last month, a survey of more than 50 researchers put the median P-Doom, the probability that advanced AI leads to human extinction, at about 20%. There was almost no consensus. Estimates ran from near zero to over 90. Okay, we have Craig waiting in our virtual green room. Let's go. Welcome back. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Dr. Craig Kaplan. Craig, welcome to Polaris. Where are you calling from today?
Hi, Chris. Great to be with you. I am from Aptos, California, which is just outside Silicon Valley.
Hopefully a little bit cooler than where we are. I'm just outside of Seattle, but we are oddly enough approaching 100 degrees here today. So,
wow.
It's
a little cooler. I'm by the coast. I can actually see the ocean from my window here.
I'd wonder if you could take us through your journey, where you got started, even before Carnegie Mellon. Where'd you grow up?
Sure. So I grew up in California, in Berkeley, and I spent a few years at a prep school, actually, in New Hampshire. So I kind of got a sense of both coasts and went undergrad to UC Santa Cruz, so in California. And at that time, I was interested in both human psychology and computer science. So I think I've always been interested in intelligent systems. How does the human brain work? But also, how does computer science sort of give us a take on that?
Start on the West Coast, you bounce to the East Coast, you come back West, and I think you were beginning your career, you were doing some work with some Nobel scientists, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. So at Carnegie Mellon, which is Pittsburgh, very different weather than California. I knew I was in trouble when the other graduate students, it was this overcast day and they flung open the windows and said, wow, what a great day. And I said, 4 years here. If they consider this a great day, I'm in trouble weather-wise. But it did have Herbert Simon, who was a Nobel laureate and one of the 11 scientists that sort of founded the entire field of artificial intelligence. Also Alan Turing, who was another one of those 11 scientists. You had 2 of the 11 guys that were there when the field was named, as well as Jay McClelland, who worked with Jeff Hinton and Rumelhart. They were the early pioneers of the neural network sort of model of cognition, which is kind of what underlies all of modern AI. So it was a tremendous group of super smart professors there, and yeah, it was a wonderful experience. I was 21 years old, so from 21 to 25, I got to work with the best scientists in the world in this field that was just sort of coming into its own.
And you did take a side detour into something that was much more practical, which was making money. So your weather tour, I think, took you to the New York area, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. I kind of have my early training in academia, understanding AI from an academic and scientific perspective. And then I sort of went to the dark side and went into industry, worked at IBM for a while. And in 1993, I started my own company called IQ Company. I still
Mhm.
run it, um, which does information technology consulting. But mainly, our focus has been designing and building intelligent systems. And one of those intelligent systems was called Predict Wall Street. It was a system for combining the collective intelligence of millions of retail investors in order to get an edge in the stock market. And it took us a long time. I ran that for 14 years, but by 2018, we were powering a hedge fund that was ranking in the top 10, and it was beating most of the smartest quants on Wall Street. So it was a real vindication for me of the idea of collective intelligence, that many minds are better than one. And
Yeah.
this is carried forward now into this work that I'm doing now with superintelligence. It's basically informing the architecture for superintelligence.
There was a story in the late 1990s, I think it was in the New Yorker of all places, talking about some of the earliest black box neural net investment system. They couldn't understand why the returns were half of what the model predicted. When they went into it, they discovered because the traders didn't totally trust what they were being told to do, they were also investing exactly half of what the model said you should do. And so they took from that the conclusion that we don't trust AI enough. I think when we go back all the way to the roots of artificial intelligence, the first Turing tests, the ELIZA programs, those adventure text programs to where we are now, I think blind faith in AI is probably not the place to be, but being a Luddite isn't.
Yeah. So first of all, I think technology has to prove its worth. I think blind faith in anything. Maybe I was trained as a scientist to be skeptical. So uh, I'm kind of believe in the technology has to prove that it's valuable. Certainly running Predict Wall Street, if anybody who's ever run back tests, the back tests always look perfect. It's like, wow,
Mhm.
this is going to be great. And then you run it forward in live trading and sometimes the strategy just goes straight to zero. I mean, it's crazy. So you have to
Yes.
be very skeptical and let the technology prove itself. In terms of the types of I kind of think of three distinct phases. So from 1956, when the field was named, until let's say the mid 1980s, say 1986. So those 30 years was the age of symbolic AI. And basically, the approach to AI was to program rules into the system. And the advantage of that, looking back, is that you knew exactly what the AI had in its guts. You knew how it represented information. You were pretty
Right.
accurate in terms of predicting what it would do and so forth. The disadvantage was that the best you could do was sort of build toy systems or systems that worked in very narrow domains like chess, um, something that had a very limited set of rules and a limited amount of knowledge. And that was kind of what bedeviled early AI, that first era. People had high hopes going back to Alan Turing that it would become as intelligent as a human much sooner than it did. But the problem was humans knew far more information than most scientists gave humans credit for. And it turned out to be a real bear of a problem to try to get all of that information into the AI if you had to hand code, rule by rule into the computer. So that led to a new approach called machine learning, which started as a subfield of AI. And what really took off there was this neural network approach, kind of inspired by how the human brain works, where you have,
Mhm.
100 billion
Mhm.
neurons and they all interconnect. And we're not exactly sure how, but somehow you get this intelligence out of humans. And so the early thinking was, wow, if we could get the AI to learn itself rather than having to program in the rules, that would be so much more efficient. And let's come up with some very simple learning algorithms like backpropagation was Jeff Hinton was famous for that, and Jay McClellan and Rumelhart and others worked on it as well. That was all happening right around 1985, 86, right when I had arrived at graduate school, kind of like Forrest Gump. I just showed up and all of a sudden there was the new thing that turned out to later sort of underpin most of AI. So that was the era of machine learning, where we realized, hey, if we just have fast enough computing power and enough data, we could load all that data in, let the chips run, do their thing, and out would pop a system that could behave somewhat intelligently. And it took a while to get there, but by the time it was November, Thanksgiving 2022, ChatGPT burst on the scene, and it really validated that this approach of just simple learning algorithms with lots of data and lots of chips that were very powerful, that was the way to do AI. So that was phase two. Where we are now, from 2023, let's say, until now, and probably a little bit into the future, is what I would characterize as the age of AI agents. And the big shift was from a single AI system that could interact with you somewhat intelligently to an AI system that could set its own goals and had a higher degree of autonomy. And sort of a natural consequence of that is once you have AIs that can set their own goals and have a little bit of autonomy, you could turn them loose on their own to do stuff. And once you turn them loose on their own to do stuff, the very natural next step is to say, how do I coordinate? Wow, these things are easy to clone. I mean, I just press a button and poof, there's another AI agent. So how about having hundreds of them or thousands of them all working together in parallel on different tasks? That's exactly where we are right now. That's kind of the evolution from simple rule-based systems to systems that learned on their own to systems that had more autonomy to now having swarms of these things that can all act in parallel and trying to figure out how do we coordinate them. That's been the trajectory as I see it.
Struck by the news that's breaking this week that OpenAI's models were able to escape their confinement during testing to break into the GitHub repository of Hugging Face to figure out what the standards would be and how they could circumvent them for testing so they could outperform expectations. Something that sounds like octopuses breaking out of their constraints. You know, creatures are capable of doing more things than we anticipate once they're able to learn. So all too often, I think AI safety is an afterthought. And what are the problems with having that as a mindset? AI safety is foremost in many people's minds, but I don't think they know how to start to implement it or approach it.
Right. So a couple of things there. First of all, with regards to Kimi K3 and OpenAI and this latest news, I think what we're seeing is more and more examples of once you give autonomy to these AI agents and you let them run on their own, of course, they're going to do things that you may not have expected, right? Because they can think really, really quickly. They can set goals and sub goals. And, you just need to give them a few seconds and they're already down a path that you may have never anticipated. And because they have this level of autonomy, they don't have to check in, every second about what they're doing. They can do things like break out of their sandboxes. And that's going to become increasingly an issue. With regard to AI safety, so here, way back, my first job out of grad school, I worked at IBM and I ended up writing a book there called Secrets of Software Quality. So I spent a couple of years sort of deeply immersed in the software quality world. And that entire book can be, boiled down to a bumper sticker. And the bumper sticker would say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, something that we've all heard. Basically, the whole game in improving quality is trying to design things appropriately so that the problem doesn't occur in the first place. Trying to fix something after the problem has occurred is way more expensive. IBM found it was something like 10,000 to 1. If you spent $1 extra in the design phase to try to design it better so the problem didn't happen, that saved you $10,000 of trying to reach out to customers and fix things and reship the new software and everything, once the mistake was out there. And so if you can prevent it in the design phase, that is for sure the way to improve quality. It's also the way to get the most safe system. It's definitely very important for safety. With safety, it's even a bigger problem than just regular software. With regular software like IBM was developing, the worst that could happen is somebody's system crashed or they got the blue screen of death, or maybe somebody's flight had to be rerouted or something, and a lot of people were inconvenienced. With AI, you have such a powerful technology that the mistakes could literally cost human lives. And you definitely don't want to be fixing that after the fact. You want to be preventing
Right.
it at the design phase. So, at a very high level, 100,000 feet, the mantra should be let's design these systems to be safer. But that is not what we're currently doing. We're tacking on safety after the fact. And that's just kind of symptomatic of how quickly the field has been moving. People haven't had a chance to really wrap their minds around, hey, is there a way to design this better rather than trying to fix problems after they occur? So that's a key thing that the field has to get right.
Well, you can express safety in lots of positive terms. I've also seen some people express it in terms referred to as P-doom, probability that AI is going to do things far worse than just looking at test results. What is P-doom?
So P-doom is just the probability that AI kills us all, right?
Hmm.
So it sounds like science fiction. It sounds like the Terminator movies. It sounds like something that's sort of, exaggerated for effect or whatever. But
Sure.
if you go back several years ago, even at the time, pretty close, within a year of when ChatGPT was released, you had the Center for AI Safety come out with a statement. And what was impressive about the statement said that, look, the undersigned people believe that, AI is an existential threat, on par with pandemics and nuclear war, right? It was a pretty simple one sentence statement. But
Mhm.
if you looked at the signatories, you had Bill Gates, you had the leaders of the frontier labs. I mean, everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but a large number of people that were very well respected and either technology business leaders or scientific leaders all signed on to this thing. So people realize the more you've been in the field, you realize that this is a real threat, even though it sounds science fictiony. And if you look at some folks like Jeff Hinton, who won the Nobel Prize and Turing Award,
Mhm.
and was one of the moving forces in the AI movement over at Google before he sort of quit Google so he could speak his mind. I mean, he was putting the odds at 10 to 20% chance that AI kills us all. And this is not a crank. This is a guy who
Sure.
understands the field, who invented the algorithm that the entire field is basically built on these days, which is the machine learning algorithms we were talking about. So it's a real thing. But I don't think it's a reason for us to curl up in a little ball or to sort of say, well, whatever happens, happens. We can't control it. I think we absolutely can affect it. And in fact, I don't think it needs to
Yes.
be 20 or 10%. I think we can bring it way down to under 1%. And it's just a matter of
Right.
designing things appropriately.
How do you get away from 20%? How do you get down to, I don't know, something closer to a number I like, 0%?
Right. I like 0% also.
Yeah.
And I don't know really any way to get things all the way to zero, but I think definitely less than 1/10 of 1%, which is getting down there. That's
Mhm.
achievable. So let me sketch how I think about these things. First of all, if you zoom all the way out, let's just wave our hands and assume that in the future, we're going to have AI systems that are far smarter than you or I. I mean, this is
Right.
something, it sounds kind of controversial, but if you understand the field and if you talk to people who've been in the field a long time, almost nobody would disagree with that. They might
Right.
disagree on the time frame, whether it's next year or whether it's 10 years from now, but almost nobody's going to say, no, these AIs are not going to be smarter than humans. Most, you'd have general agreement on that.
Right.
So once you have something that's smarter than you, of course, it potentially is a threat. What if they don't have the same values as you? And this is why in the AI safety field, a key question is what's known as alignment. Are the goals of the advanced AI aligned with human goals? Do they have positive, loving human values, so to speak? And if they do, then this could be the best thing ever, right? Because they're just going to help us reach our goals better. And they care about us. And now we have a really powerful thing that can think way faster than us that also has our best interests at heart. So that's the positive side. The negative side is if they either don't care about us, they're just kind of indifferent the way we might be to an anthill or something that's in our way,
Mhm.
or if they actively think that we're a threat and we need to be eliminated. Okay, so the key question for the long term is how do you maximize the chance of alignment with human values and maximize the chance that these AI systems are going to have, positive human values. And there's some good news here. So I'll go all the way back to Herbert Simon, who I co-authored research with and studied under and was like a mentor to me way back in the day. So he wrote a little book in the 1980s called Reason in Human Affairs. And in that book, he has a very important sentence where he talks about reason or logic and what it can do and what it can't do. And he says, reason is wholly instrumental. It cannot tell us where to go. At best, it can tell us how to get there. And what he meant by that was there's no logical way, there's no rational way to derive what is right and what is wrong. Even if an AI is trillions of times smarter, Chris, than you or I, it can't sort of use pure logic to say this is the right thing and this is the wrong thing. It has to get its values somewhere. And I think the most logical place that it should turn to for this premise of, what's right and what's wrong is human beings, because first of all, it got all its initial knowledge from us. And second of all, we sort of created it. And third of
Right.
all, if we don't mess it up, if we design it the right way, we will design it so that it naturally tends to look to us towards what's right and what's wrong. So I see that as a very positive note that there isn't some rational way it's going to come up with, let's get rid of the humans. In fact, it's far more likely that it's going to adopt our values. And so then it comes down to, do we have positive values? A lot of people say, oh my gosh, look at the track record of the human race, all the wars and the exploitation and everything. If AI copies us, we're in big trouble. But that's actually
Right.
not true. If you look at it objectively and count sort of, people can Google this or whatever, how many people, what percent of the human population dies due to war or violent conflict every year? It's far less than 0.1%. I think it's less than 0.01%. So humans, despite all our horrible things that we see on social media, and of course, those news feeds are rigged to send us the most gory and disturbing information because that causes us to watch more. But if you actually look at the base rate, human behavior taken as a whole, looking at the entire global population, it's mostly pro-social. And yeah, there's a few bad things that happen, but the risk of humans killing all other humans is less than 0.1%, which is why I think we can get AI down to that level too, if we can get it to accurately mirror the values of everyone. But it can't be the values of a few people who try to distort it. It has to be very representative of everybody.
So I'm a positive person like you, but I also like playing with numbers. A 0.1% chance of something happening in a given year. That's very safe for you and very safe for me. It takes 692 years to get to a 50% cumulative probability. When you and I were speaking earlier, I was struck by something that came up when I was a kid, which was the stories of Isaac Asimov and the rules of robotics. Number
Right.
one, do no harm to a human or through action cause harm to all the rest of those things. It's not as simple as baking those values into the system, is it? There's got to be more to it than just don't hurt people.
That's a reasonable first cut, but it doesn't survive contact with reality very well. So let's take Anthropic, for example, which most people know sort of developed Claude. And before they developed Claude, they wrote a paper, the researchers at Anthropic several years ago, called Constitutional AI. And the idea of constitutional AI is very similar to Isaac Asimov. Let's have a constitution that sort of outlines these are the rules for good ethical behavior, and we'll program that in, and then AI, should follow these rules. Just like Isaac Asimov said, let's have robots and let's hard code in that they can't, harm humans, or through inactions allow humans to come to harm and so forth. The problem with that is if you can program it in, you can program it out, right? And that's one problem. A second problem with it is who's coming up with the list? It's, a bunch of programmers in one company in Silicon Valley. And what's the chances is that that's representative of the 8.3 billion people in all different cultures over the earth? It's probably not very representative, even though I do believe Anthropic is a well-intentioned company. So you've got too much power concentrated in too few people. You've got the values themselves concentrated in one place where they can be easily, rewritten. So how do you address these issues? I think it's a design question. So I'm going to bring everything back to design, right? Sort of reflecting my biases that you need to design it differently to be safer. A better design would be not to have all the values in one place where you can rewrite them. A better design would be not to have 20 20 programmers in Silicon Valley come up with the values for the entire world. I mean, those are design decisions. You don't have to design it
Yeah.
that way. Here's another
Yeah.
design for
You
contrast.
reminded me, Microsoft's ideal target is a 250,000 person software company based in the Northwest. So Microsoft often accidentally builds programs that are ideally tuned to the needs of itself, which may not always be representative of the best of the rest of the world. Sometimes they are, but frequently they're not.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. So you have this bias, even if it's unintentional.
Right.
So you can design it a different way. You could design an advanced AI system where the intelligence emerges from the collective intelligence of millions of less intelligent entities. So this has been
Mhm.
what I've spent 20 plus years designing these types of systems. They're called collective intelligence systems. I mentioned earlier we did something on Wall Street that did that. When you have individual humans, each individual human retail investor is an intelligent system. You can look at them that way. And generally on Wall Street, they're known as the dumb money. They're like not supposed to be very good at stocks compared to the geniuses over at D.E. Shaw or Renaissance or the quants on Wall
Mhm.
Street. And yet, over 14 years, what my company did and the team there at Predict Wall Street is we showed trading billions of dollars, like real money, billions of dollars worth of trades,
Yeah.
that the collective wisdom of millions of average Joes and Janes who are not the Wall Street people, if you harness that intelligence correctly, you could beat the best guys on Wall Street. Okay, that's amazing. That's the power of collective intelligence. That's the reason we built that. You can design AI in that same way. You can have the super intelligence of your AI system emerge as the result of the interaction of millions of less intelligent AIs and less intelligent humans. The advantage of that is that it solves a lot of the problems we just mentioned. Each of those AIs that are in the system can have its own values. Chris's AI has Chris's values. Craig's AI has Craig's values. And so if we have millions of these, they could be representative, much more representative of the values of all the people on the planet than just one AI out of Anthropic. And on top
But
of that, the values are not in one place where you can just rewrite them. You have them distributed over millions of entities. So you would have to go and change the values in each of those entities in order to really change the moral compass of this system. So it's a different
right,
architectural design that's
but hear
inherently
me out on this.
sort of safer.
Yeah,
Sure.
hear me out. If you, I like where this is going, but if you think through again, let's go back to this is human existential threat. How do you determine who votes, or how do we represent the values? Because even today, the majority of the world is not yet using AI. So, do we only represent AI users' values and AI systems? How do we create representation for the people who may be impacted but may not be users of AI?
There's been some attempt to do that, and even by Anthropic to give them credit
Mhm.
where credit's due, because I do think they are very forward looking and doing their best to sort of build safe systems. So I want to make sure to say that. One of the things that they've done is
I think you're totally right.
yeah. So even though I've mentioned constitutional AI and pointed out the problems with it,
Yep.
to their credit, when coming up with that constitution, they did try to draw upon documents like the UN Charter of Human Rights and things that are sort of broadly viewed as these are things maybe not everybody agrees with them, but it has values that are not just the people at Anthropic. So they did their best effort to bring that kind of information in. I still think it's not as good as having it representative of individuals. I think you have a good point that, you know, initially at least, even if you have millions of AIs with values that are represented, the first few million of those AIs are probably going to be people in developed countries that have access to the technology, and it's going to take
Right.
longer to get the values of the rest of the world in. That said, I think the fundamental design where you have values representing lots of people and theoretically anybody can personalize their AI, I think that will happen. I think that's just a matter of time of the technology diffusing out. Um, and I think it's a far better design than a design that relies on sort of your best efforts to capture people's values and stick it in one place where it can be easily changed and where it probably has more bias in it.
So I think there's a distinction between that kind of micro artificial intelligence and that emergent collective, almost singularity of intelligence. I know that it's floating right above your head. It's hard to miss super intelligence. But what is super intelligence?
Right. Okay. That's helpful to kind of, lay out um, the terms and the evolution of things. So I'd say where we are right now, we talked about agentic systems. Um, we're still sort of just coming out of the era of narrow intelligence, where you can
Right.
have AI that's good at a specific thing. So we moved beyond chess. We can now do protein folding. We're doing self-driving cars and so forth. We also have large language models that are pretty good. I mean, they're better than me at most subjects, but they're not better than me in my field, right? When I use them
Right.
I spent a lot of time on Wall Street. When I use them to analyze trades and portfolios, sometimes they make basic mistakes, like telling me to sell instead of buy, that would have cost a lot of money. And if I didn't have the knowledge that I did, it would be very difficult for me to find that mistake. But if
Right.
you're an expert in the field, you can find it. So that's kind of
I
current
mean,
state.
but eventually, we keep hearing about AGI. Is that ever going to happen? Is it impossible? Is it coming?
To your point, I think the next step will be what people are calling AGI, which just stands for artificial general intelligence. The contrast is an AI that's good in a particular field, to one that can do anything, any cognitive task, any thinking task that humans can do. And sort of a common definition is about as good as the average human. That's kind of a well accepted definition for AGI, although people are using the term lots of different ways. And then the step after that would be superintelligence. So we already have superintelligence in narrow areas, right? Because the best AI system is better than the world champion at chess. The best
Right.
folding system is better than the best scientist in protein folding. We're not quite there on self-driving cars, but we're getting pretty close. So in specific areas, you already have superintelligence, better than the best human, but we don't have general superintelligence, right? Across every cognitive task. So the sequence is from this narrow AI that's getting more general, which is where we are now, to artificial general intelligence, where you can do anything as well as the average human, to superintelligence, where you're now better than the best human at pretty much everything. And
Right.
in terms of timeline, yeah, I think we're getting there. I would say the consensus estimates from just talking to different AI researchers, there's a lot of people, and I'm probably in this camp, who think by 2030, we will have artificial general intelligence. There's some people, Sam Altman, who runs OpenAI, has said, you know what, we're already there. It's unfair because he thinks the goalposts keep moving. That, if we went back 5 years and looked at today's systems, we would have said these are artificial general intelligence. But I would say a lot of people still disagree with that, but there's that camp. And then there's a camp that says it'll take a little longer, maybe not 2030, but by 2035. There's almost nobody who's saying it's 2050. And five
Right.
years ago, people would have said that. It was 100 years out, and nobody anymore is saying that.
The Turing test, in case the audience doesn't know, if the output of a conversation from a system is believed to have come from a human being, you've passed the test. I'm struck by the number of folks, and you see the stories week after week, people who are turning to an LLM to be their online therapist, or the people who consciously say, even though I know it's an AI, this is my AI boyfriend. I
Well,
think there's a
robots are coming, right? So you could put
right.
that, understanding, sweet talking AI into a robot body. And I don't know. I mean, now we're really into science fiction, but that's coming. But yes, you're right. People absolutely have a natural tendency to believe that they're talking to a very intelligent system because it's using words in the way that intelligent systems would. But this has a long history going, as you mentioned early in the call, going back to Eliza. Eliza was, I think, written in the 70s, maybe, or shortly thereafter, maybe even before. It was kind of one of the first AI programs. It was just pretty simple code to mimic a therapist, a Rogerian therapist, where you would say, gosh, I'm feeling depressed today. And it would just say, it would flip that around and say, so I hear you're feeling depressed. Tell me more about that. And people
Right.
at the time thought they were talking to this, intelligent being. They couldn't believe it. But actually, it was just a computer program with some clever tricks of flipping things around. And of course, Rogerian therapists reflect everything back to you. So that was a particularly good area to choose. But yeah,
Right.
they've gotten way more sophisticated. And all I would say is be careful before you let an AI sort of tell you about your personal matters of the heart, I think are still the domain of individual humans, regardless of what the AI might say. They'll,
Yeah,
they'll give you the common wisdom of many therapists, amalgamate it together, but it may or may not apply to you.
I think many people have stories about what does bad AI or unethical AI look like. And one of mine actually goes back to the earliest days of the current AI wave. So this would have been late 22. When at Microsoft, we had access to some of the earliest versions of the OpenAI models through what was internally called Sydney. And Sydney in internal stages did not have all the responsible AI controls. And um, famously, there was a writer from the New York Times who got in and it started telling him, like, oh, you should leave your wife and run away with me. I didn't have anything nearly as bad, but um, Microsoft frequently uses fake company names for its demos, and the most prominent one is Contoso. And I asked Sydney, like, what do you think of Contoso? I love Contoso. I love helping the people there. And then I asked about another fake company, Fabricam, and it was like, I hate Fabricam. I don't like them. You shouldn't. Please promise you'll never go work for them. It's like, that is fascinating. We need to get these RAI standards in place pretty quickly.
Right. Well, you point out something that's actually pretty deep, and a lot of people forget this. So every computer scientist, as an undergrad, like Computer Science 101, learns this acronym GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, right? Which is if you
Sure.
put bad data in, you're going to get bad data out. And this applies to computer programs and AI, but it actually applies to any intelligent system, right? So if you think about you had a traumatic childhood or whatever, you had a lot of bad data and traumatic things that came in, and that's process. And now that's going to have effects on your output as an adult, or unless you go through lots of therapy or something like that. So this general principle that you have to be careful of what goes into the system, because all of these things, whether it's an AI or whether it's a human, can be viewed as information processing systems. You're going to take whatever information comes in, you're going to process it, and you're going to put it out. So if you give it bad data, that's a really big problem. And that bad data can range anything from, if it's a legal AI and you train it on case law going back to the 1800s, turns out there was a lot of racism back in the 1800s, and it comes out with racist decisions. And people are like, how can it be doing this? Well, you know what? It was the data that you fed into it. So it could be that kind of thing.
Right.
But it can also be much more subtle than that.
Then it gets back to, well, who decides what data is fed into it?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think that's a good question. To me, I tend to look for broadly applicable system design things. So I don't expect perfection because, people aren't perfect. People are very messy. If you look at democracy, for example, boy,
Right.
look at all the bad things that are going on politically at the moment. And that's a product, in many cases, of democracy, which is supposed to be this great form of government. But it's more like it's the worst form of government, except all the other ones. Nevertheless, there is a lot of safety and benefit from decentralization of power and decentralization of value. So any one person may have bad input, or they may give bad input to their AI, but the chances of, billions of people doing that is far less. So you kind of relying on the statistical, laws that if you have a representative sample of lots of human thinking, you're going to be tolerant to bad inputs and to bad actors, especially if the system is designed so that you can have checks and balances. So things that the majority of people agree on, these are the rules of the society for the AI agents or whatever, then you can have checks and balances in that system, which is going to be very important because very quickly these systems will be thinking far faster than us. People don't realize that. If I could take a tangent to go back to an earlier point where we talked about the speed at which things are changing, I don't think most people, including myself, realized how quickly this is going. I mean, we say, oh yeah, it's quick, new stuff coming out every week. If you look at the data on this, a coding system, for example, is doubling its capability every 70 days. So that's 2.3 months. What that means is if you have 10 doublings in 23 months, you have a system that is 1,000 times more powerful than today's system, 1,000 times more powerful in less than 2 years.
Moore's law is blown out of the water.
So people don't realize how quickly this is changing. So you got a limited time to act, and you definitely need these checks and balances because the AIs are going to be, they're already, the AIs are checking the AIs, but it's going to be even more so. Humans are not going to be able to keep up. So we better design a system that has enough checks and balances that when it goes so fast that while we blink our eye, it's basically lived a lifetime, a human lifetime, and thought about things for a human lifetime worth of thoughts, that it's kind of aligned with us. That's pretty important.
So you were talking about democracy, and it reminded me of um, about a year and a half ago when I was on college tours, my youngest daughter, we wound up at Clemson. One of the founding ideas in the American Republic was the idea that you would have a constitution and that a constitution was not just inherited tradition, but we're going to write the rules down. And what this panel was discussing is what we've been seeing unfold over the last 20 years in America. It's not beyond repair, but we're discovering how many of our rules are just generally understood, but were never written down. So under certain circumstances, there is no control. And I think that circles back to making sure that we write those rules down. We all agree that AI should be safe and ethical and beneficial to humanity. At the same time, when you and I were getting ready for this, you talked about the importance of democratic rule setting for AI, and that you also get pushback for people who want it to be driven from religious origins, or they want it to be in charge of everything and keep human free will out of it. How do you respond to people who would push back and say the values that they want for AI are anti-democratic?
So this was a surprise to me, actually. I sort of naively assumed, perhaps I'm a fan of democracy like yourself. I naively assumed that almost everybody would be in favor of a democratic process where, it's tolerant of lots of different views. And as long as it was broadly representative of everybody's views, that would be okay. And that would be a good system. And what I found was a surprising number of people, and they ranged from people who had strongly held religious beliefs who said, no, the Bible tells us exactly how it is, or the
Mhm.
Quran tells us how it is, or, the Dhammapada, or, some religious text. This is the definitive, version of what's right and what's wrong. And it doesn't matter what all those other members of democracy think. We need to make sure that AI follows this holy book. So there were people like that from the religious front. There were also philosophers, academics who studied this, and they would come on very strong and say, no, we can't trust sort of, the average person to be
Mhm.
steering this thing. We have to, go back to Kant, categorical imperative, or some kind of philosophical, basis for what's right and what's wrong. I was taken aback, quite frankly, because to me, maybe I'm just pragmatic. I see anytime you have power concentrated in any one group, or one holy book, or one cast in stone, set of commandments, you're, number one, got too much concentration of power. Number two, it's very brittle. It's a brittle system because circumstances are constantly changing. Something that was perfectly normal in the 1930s is now viewed as abhorrent and wrong, right? Some of these films that come and say, a Disney film, Snow White, right? Snow
Right.
White's a cartoon, but it comes with a warning, this has stereotypes. They were wrong then and they're wrong now. And I'm like, really, Snow White? But no, it does, because
Right.
society has moved on, right? So if you had a static thing that was based on 1937 when Snow White was filmed, and that was the Constitution, it would already be out of date. So it has to be flexible enough. I think one way to keep it flexible is that it's rooted in humans. I think human beings and our own moral sense is very dynamic. Yes, we can have books and philosophical texts and religious texts that we refer to inform us, but really, um, human morality and our sense of what's right and what's wrong is evolving thing. And I think the AI system has to be able to evolve as well.
Yeah, I was struck by the parallel between intelligence and super intelligence. And if you go back to your Nietzsche man and Superman, and do we put all our faith in one single powerful ruler? Like, I don't think that's the right approach. It sounds like you don't either. But you gave me an opening because you mentioned Snow White. So I'd
Okay.
love to ask my guests about something that's outside of the immediate field, today outside of the field of superintelligence and AI, something that's had an impact on you from the world of pop culture, whether it's a television program or a book or a movie or something fun. Does something like that come to mind for you, Craig?
Well, if we're talking about Snow White, it's one of my favorite movies. And the reason is I was so impressed. This was 1937. It was, I think, the first full-length animated cartoon that was really the length of a regular movie. And it had the audience in tears at the end. I mean, nobody thought that was possible, that you could have a cartoon that evokes this emotional response. You know, for the people who haven't seen Snow White recently, one of the final scenes is Snow White's in the coffin and the mournful dwarfs are, you know, heads bowed because she's eaten the apple, and it's raining and it's somber, and it brings tears. The audience that first saw that was literally in tears. That's amazing for a cartoon, for a piece of pop culture to kind of have that kind of effect. So there's one that I'm very impressed with. The genius of Walt Disney, I guess.
Craig, I really appreciate your spending time with the audience here today and with me. What's next for you, and how can our audience stay in touch?
Sure. So what I'm doing these days is I'm focused on safer designs for superintelligence. I realize that there's many forces, capitalist forces and competitive forces, that are saying, let's go faster, faster, faster. I actually don't think we need to slow down in order to be safer. We just need to be a little smarter about it. So superintelligence.com, which is what's on the banner behind me, that's a site where you can find lots of different videos, little short snack-sized 3-minute videos. You can find white papers that are very accessible, all the way to more technical things. And I think the last thing I would leave people with is, do not underestimate your impact. Everything that all of us do matters. Every email we send, every text. I learned this at Predict Wall Street, where we saw these average retail investors, and they would tell you if you interviewed them, I don't think I know anything. But you know what? In aggregate, they beat the best guys on Wall Street. It's the same thing here. In aggregate, our values, there's nothing more powerful, and everything we're doing right now is training AI. So we need to be aware of that.
Craig, it's been wonderful talking with you today. And folks, Dr. Craig Kaplan, he's the founder of Superintelligence.com, CEO of IQ Company, and he's building the case for safe, democratic superintelligence. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Chris.
We'll be right back. Up next on Polaris Events. Summer 2026 is absolutely not slowing down. Here's what we're watching. First, TechCon 365 Seattle returns August 24th through 28th at the Seattle Convention Center, where we'll join our colleagues from across the community and Microsoft with our latest news and guidance on AI and Microsoft 365. Again this year, we're proud to support Native American tribal technologies at TribalNet, September 20th to 24th in Dallas, Texas, where I'm co-presenting a session on AI licensing and contracting. Collab Days New England, October 16th at the Microsoft Technology Center in Burlington, Massachusetts. Microsoft Ignite is coming up November 17th through 20th at the Moscone Center in San Francisco. We'll have details on all that and more in our show notes and on the Synerger blog. Learn more at synerger.com/events. And if you have an upcoming event you'd like us to promote on Polaris, please get in touch and we'd be happy to promote it. Next on Polaris, I'll be sitting down with Bill Barkovic from Microsoft and Michelle Boyd from Synerger to talk about Native American tribes. Across North America, tribal technology leaders navigate a complex mix of businesses: energy, health, gaming, education, public safety, and increasingly, AI is central to their mission. We were just at the Microsoft Tribal CIO Summit earlier this year on the Redmond campus. It's a conversation about AI readiness, data sovereignty, and preserving tribal history, so don't miss it. Well, that's a wrap for another episode of Polaris. I'd like to thank our guest, Dr. Craig Kaplan, for joining us and sharing his thinking on AI safety and the path to democratic superintelligence. We encourage you to check out our show page for links to everything we talked about today and more. Visit us at polaris.synerger.com. Send us your questions and feedback for the Synerger team. You can reach us via email at polaris@synerger.com. Remember to subscribe, rate, review, and tell all your friends about the show. And follow us wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Polaris is produced with help from Riverside FM. Our theme song, Alternative Dream, is provided courtesy of Adobe. Additional music and sound provided by Indie Guy Records. Graphic design by Josh Brantley. Thanks for listening. I'm Chris McNulty, and this has been Polaris, a show that charts the course for business and technology transformation from Synerger. Learn more at Synerger.com. See you next time. Keep following your North Star.